used to work the night shift at a mid-sized hotel, one of those chain places in the suburbs where everything's a little too clean and a little too quiet. You probably know the type. Off a main road, just far enough from the city to attract people who didn't want to pay downtown prices. The kind of place where nothing really happens, until it does. And guess who gets a front row seat? Whichever poor employee was on shift that night. I guess if I'm being completely honest, it really wasn't a bad gig, but wasn't the best either. Most nights it was dead quiet. Just me, a cup of coffee, and a flickering monitor watching a couple of empty hallways. The occasional guest would stumble in late, or I'd deal with a lost tourist, but for the most part it was uneventful. The hardest part was staying awake, especially after midnight when time seemed to stretch out forever. There's paperwork and all kinds of clerical upkeep in the back, and of course, folding things. There was almost always something to help the time go by. I've been working there for almost 2 years at this point, and I'd seen my fair share of weirdos. There was always this guy who parked by the dumpster and just lingered long enough to make you wonder if he lived in his car, or came by day because we had a nice dark parking lot that he could get high in. Sometimes the occasional crackhead who'd somehow scrape together just enough cash to rent a room for the night, then refuse to leave the next morning. Domestic disputes were another common occurrence. Raised voices, slamming doors, the uncomfortable task of calling the police, and try not to think about what was really going on behind those closed doors. But most of that was manageable. It's part of the job. You deal with it, you make a note, and you move on. Don't let it stick and let it slide off your back, as my old man would say. Then came the night that I met the man who asked specifically for room 401A. It was a Wednesday night, middle of the week. Things were slower than ever. I was on the overnight shift, starting at 11 p.m. and running through to 7 a.m. The lobby was quiet. Only sounds were the faint hum of the AC, a soft clink of the coffee pot refilling itself for the third time that night. I'd say around midnight, the front door slid open, and a man walked right in. At first glance, there was nothing really remarkable about him. He had that typical business travel wear, mid-30s, clean-shaven, wearing a dark jacket and an over-the-button shirt. A little tired, but nothing out of the ordinary. He approached the desk, his steps pretty light and his expression calm. Didn't do anything to land on my radar. "Good evening, sir," I said, my voice breaking the silence. "You need a room for the night?" He nodded, his eyes scanning the lobby as if he was looking for something or somebody else. "Yeah," he said, his voice even. "I need a room, but not just any room. I want one in particular." I raised an eyebrow. Most people just wanted a room, any room. I've never had somebody request a specific one before. Okay, sure, which one?" "Room 401A, he said casually. I froze for a second, processing what he just asked me. The thing is, we didn't have any rooms labeled with letters. None of them. Our rooms were numbered by floor and unit count. First floor, rooms 100 to 113. Second floor, 214 to 227, and so on. Room 401A, that didn't exist. I thought maybe I misheard him, asked him to repeat it, and he said the same thing. 401A. When he said it this time, he was staring right through me, giving me this sly grin. I chuckled awkwardly, thinking he was making some kind of joke. "Think you might have the wrong hotel. We don't have a room 401A. Maybe you mean room 440? The man's expression didn't change. If anything, he seemed amused now, like I was the one making a mistake. No, I'm sure it's room 401A. I blinked, trying to figure out how to explain it. "Sir, there is no room 401A. We don't have rooms with letters here. You can get a room on the 4th floor if that's what you're looking for, but..." His demeanor shifted instantly. His calm, mild energy evaporated, replaced by something darker and much more aggressive. He stepped closer to the desk now, his eyes narrowing. I asked for room 401A. Are you telling me you don't have it? I took an involuntary step back, my heart racing. This wasn't just a guy who got the wrong place. He was serious, dead serious. And his frustration seemed to be growing by the second. Suddenly, it then occurred to me he could have a knife or a gun. Look, sir, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I don't know what to tell you. We don't have a room 401A. It's literally not in our system. Look, maybe you got the wrong hotel, or maybe there's been some other kind of mistake. I can get you a different room easily. How about room 440? It's available and it's on the 4th floor. His eyes locked onto mine, cold and calculating. He didn't say anything at first, just stared at me like he was committing every detail in my face into his memory. Then he slowly leaned in, lowered his voice to a menacing whisper. Lying, he hissed. I know that room is ready, and you're gonna regret keeping it from me. Before I could respond, he stepped back and straightened his jacket, walked out of the lobby. The automatic doors slid shut behind him, leaving me standing there shaken and confused. I spent the rest of my shift on edge, jumping at every noise I heard. I kept expecting him to come back and start yelling or worse, but he never did. That night passed without incident, and by the time my shift ended, I almost convinced myself it was just some weird misunderstanding. Maybe that guy was just crazy, or maybe he was playing some kind of prank that I didn't understand. But that wouldn't be much of a story, would it? Because it didn't end there. Exactly 1 week passed, and the memory of that strange encounter slowly began to fade. Sure, I kept my eyes peeled during my shifts, half expecting that same man to show up again. But nothing out of the ordinary happened again. The hotel had its usual flow of late-night guests, some weirder than others, but nobody came looking for a room that didn't exist. By the time that next Wednesday had rolled around, I almost had written that whole thing off. People like him do show up sometimes. I've had my share of crazy customers over the years, paranoid guests who thought the government was watching them, couples who got into fights and tried to drag me inside their drama. This guy was really no different, just another nutcase who probably confused us with another hotel. That night I clocked in for my shift at the usual time, 11 p.m. sharp. My coworker Jason was finishing up his shift. It looked like he had a long day. He gave me a tired nod as I walked in. Quiet night? I asked, hoping for a smooth, uneventful shift. Mostly, Jason said, stretching his arms with a yawn. But some weird guy came by earlier, dropped off a key card. I frowned. Key card? Yeah, he said it wasn't for this hotel, but figured we'd want it back. Thing is, it's one of ours, just an old one. It looked like it'd been through hell. Now I was interested. We changed our key cards a few years ago, but a few older ones were probably still floating around. It wasn't unusual for people to hold on to them after checkout, but most of the time, they were useless after being deactivated. Jason handed me the key card. My heart skipped a beat when I saw the number that was printed on it. Room 401A. My mouth fell open. I must have stared at that card for a whole 60 seconds, mind racing to make sense of it. Are you sure this is ours? Jason shrugged. It does look like one of the old ones. You'd know better than me. You've been here longer. The plastic was worn and scratched like it had been through years and years of use, but there it was, clear as day. Room 401A. It made no sense. That room did not exist. I knew that, and so did Jason, but here's this key card, staring back at me like some kind of sick joke. I'll look into it, I muttered, trying to keep my voice steady. Probably just some kind of mix-up. Jason didn't seem too concerned. He gave me a half-hearted wave and headed for the door, probably eager to get home and forget about the weirdness of his shift. As soon as he left, I slid back into my chair behind the desk, that key card still in my hand. My fingers brushed over the numbers again, as if touching it would somehow change what was printed on there. It didn't. There was suddenly a deep desire inside me to try that key card on every door in the building, just to see which unit used to be the infamous 401A. I glanced up at the clock, 11:30 p.m. The night stretched out before me, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't sure I wanted to be here. I spent the next hour nervously flipping through the channels on the TV behind my desk, trying to distract myself, but I could not shake the feeling that something was wrong. Every single creak of the building, every faint noise from the hallway, it set me on edge. I kept glancing back and forth at the security monitors, half expecting to see that man, the one who'd asked for room 401A, staring back at me from one of those empty hallways. But the halls were deserted. No guests, no staff, just a flickering image of the empty fourth floor on one of the screens. But that's when I heard it. At first it was just this light tapping, faint and irregular, like somebody was knocking on a door from far away. I ignored it, thinking it was probably the ice machine acting up, or maybe a guest closing their door too hard. But that sound did not stop. It grew louder and more incessant, like it was moving closer to me. I sat up listening. The tapping was coming from behind a wall. My wall. The office was in the back of the hotel, nowhere near the guest room, so there's no reason anybody should be knocking on the other side. I stood up quickly, heart pounding, walked to the far end of the office where the sound was the loudest. It was slow and methodical, almost like somebody was tapping out a message. I pressed my ear to the wall, trying to figure out what it could be, and the noise stopped. I froze, waiting. Breath caught in my throat as a second stretched out before me, the silence becoming unbearable. The phone rang. I jumped and nearly knocked the chair over as I rushed to grab the receiver. Front desk, I said, voice a little shaky. For a moment there was nothing, just silence on the other end, and then breathing. Slow, deliberate breathing. Like somebody was standing just inches away from the phone, listening. Hello? I said again. Anybody there? That same breathing continued for a few more seconds before the line went dead. I slammed the phone down, my heart racing, and checked the caller ID on the phone's display. No number, just a string of zeros, the kind you see when somebody's calling from inside the hotel. I stared at the phone, waiting for it to ring again, but the room was silent. Too silent. That tapping had stopped, the eerie breathing now gone. I glanced at the security monitors. Still nothing. The fourth floor was empty, halls still eerily quiet. I tried to convince myself, okay, it's just a prank. There's a guest messing with me. Or maybe the guy from last week was playing some long game to freak me out. But there was something in the pit of my stomach that told me this was different. This wasn't just some drunk guest or a faulty phone line. I spent the next few hours in a state of heightened alert, checking the security footage every few seconds, pacing the office, listening for any other strange sounds. Every now and again, I thought I'd hear faint noises, footsteps in the distance, the sound of a door closing, but nobody or anything ever appeared on the monitors. Then around 3 a.m., the phone rang again. I picked it up cautiously, half expecting the same breathing that I heard from before. But this time, there was a voice, barely even above a whisper, but I could hear it clearly. Room 401A, the voice said. It's waiting for you. Then the line went dead. I stood there, receiver still in hand, mind now racing. The voice on the phone had been so calm, so matter-of-fact. But it wasn't just the words that chilled me, it was the tone. It sounded like somebody who knew something that I didn't, like they were in on a secret that I was about to uncover, whether I wanted to or not. That was enough for me. I holed myself up in the main office and just waited for dawn. No one came in, and I didn't make any effort to get anything else done. When the sun came up, I left a note with my notice on it and left the second my relief got there. No job out there is worth that kind of headache. And I never saw that asshole again. Never got any more weird calls. But for one night, I would have told you that I believe in ghosts. When I told this story to some friends a few months later, they had a theory that pretty much fit the bill. They thought maybe 401A could be code for something. Perhaps that guy wasn't trying to buy a room, but something else altogether. Either way, I don't want to know what that was.
I was 14 when this happened, and this was over spring break. My parents' anniversary happened to be during this week, so they went on a date night a few hours north and were staying in a hotel. Having the house to myself for once, I invited one of my friends, Justin, to stay the night. He brought a ton of snacks and sodas, which we set up on the table in the basement and fired up the PlayStation. We had the speakers up pretty loud, and were gaming down there for 3 hours straight. Eventually though, Justin went upstairs to get a glass of water, and when he came back down, he looked worried. I asked what was up, and he said there was someone outside the house. By the kitchen, we had a large sliding glass door, and I guess he saw a person standing in our backyard. I thought he was trying to play a joke on me, but he was serious. We both went back upstairs and into the kitchen, and at first look, it didn't look like anyone was in the backyard. But then we noticed that there were some smudges on the outside of the door that looked like someone might have been leaning on the glass and looking inside. That's obviously really creepy, so I shut the blinds and we did a quick perimeter check around the other windows. We didn't see anything else, so we figured we were all good. Again, we were both just kids and didn't really know how to handle something like this. After a couple minutes, we went back downstairs and continued where we left off. Another couple hours went by, and it had to be well into the night, like 2 or 3 a.m. Justin was getting tired, so we wrapped up our last match and turned off the PlayStation. The basement had 2 small couches, so we each took one and laid out some blankets, then turned off the lights and called it a night. For some reason, I had trouble falling asleep. Like I would fall asleep for a few minutes and then wake right back up, over and over. I don't know why, possibly from too much caffeine, but it went on for a really long time. It felt like over an hour. But then, one of these times that I woke up, something was different. I opened my eyes. It was pitch black in the whole basement, but there was a tiny streak of light across the other end of the room. I sat up a bit and could tell it was coming from the door above the staircase. I looked over at the other couch, and Justin was still there, sound asleep. Did he get up at some point to get more water? There's no way I wouldn't have noticed. I got up, feeling too uneasy to sleep without making sure this was nothing. I went over to the bottom of the stairs and looked up. The door was cracked open, but not enough to see through. I went to the top and opened it further. The hallway light was on, and so was the kitchen light. It was about then that I remembered about that man that Justin said was standing outside the house, and I walked over to the kitchen to look out the back door. The backyard was empty, and nobody was out there from what I could see. As I was about to look away though, something moved across the reflection on the glass door. I spun around, looking behind me and staring down the hall. Whatever I just saw had quickly moved across the other end of the hallway. I didn't know what to do. I just stood for a second before sprinting back into the basement. I woke up Justin, and after a quick explanation, he was just as terrified as I was. We hid in one of the closets down there and called the police. and while we were waiting, we could hear someone moving around upstairs. It was like they were running around the house, looking for something. It got quiet after a few minutes though, and when police showed up, the person was gone. They found that the small bolt that locked the back door was snapped off, so that's how they got in. Other than that, we don't know anything. For several years after this incident though, every few months we would find those same smudges on the back door of someone clearly looking inside. It wasn't until we finally got a security camera that they left us alone, at least as far as we can tell. It's been over a year since we've seen any signs of them. What they wanted is still unknown.
Our official merch store is finally here. If you want to support more of our channel, check out our merch shop. The link is in the description down below. See you on the next video.